So my literary analysis of the Russian sleep experiment went up last week, and it seems to have ruffled some feathers, but the reception was mostly positive. And I had some people suggest that I apply that same format to other stories that are kind of known for not being that great, so today I'm going to do that with Eyeless Jack. This story was actually one that I read years ago when I was in middle school, and again, I thought it was super creepy, and then Creepcast read it and I just kind of cringed for my younger self. So today I'm going to be going through the entire story with a fine-toothed comb and taking a look at all the ridiculous plot points and writing quirks that make this story kind of hilarious. As always, my intention is not to make fun of the author of this story. Writing is just really hard, and putting your work out on the internet is incredibly admirable. But I also think it's important to understand why a story just doesn't work structurally, or why the grammar feels off, or why certain plot points end up being kind of funny rather than scary. Because if you are an aspiring horror author, then it's good to know these things, so hopefully you can avoid the pitfalls that so many of these old creepypastas fall into. I will be looking at the original Eyeless Jack creepypasta, and it's actually pretty short. At the time of posting this, I'm actually going to be out of town, and I want to get some quicker videos out so as not to disrupt my upload schedule. I like making those long videos, but sometimes I don't want to spend 2 hours recording and a full day editing. I'll definitely be doing more longer videos in the future though. Also, I had a few people point out to me that I seem to be a very pedantic person when it comes to these videos, and being pedantic is kind of the point. If you were to talk to me on the street, I'm actually not this critical when it comes to pretty much any of the media that I consume. These videos don't exist to tell anybody that you can't enjoy something. It's fine to like these stories. But the point of these videos is that the concept of looking at an old creepypasta through a critical literary analysis lens is kind of funny and interesting to do. All that to say, if you don't like nitpicking or somebody taking an overly critical look at something, then this video is not for you. You've been warned. But without further ado, let's get into my literary analysis of Eyeless Jack. So like with Jeff the Killer and the Russian sleep experiment, we have to talk about the picture associated with this creepypasta. In my opinion, it's not nearly as frightening as the Jeff the Killer picture. It's supposed to be this weird eyeless figure staring over you while you sleep, but my mind always thinks it's just like Eyeless Jack floating in midair completely horizontal. And something about that is just kind of funny to me. Maybe that's just me though. People could find this image really scary. I just personally don't think it gets to me that much. Like I said, the story itself is pretty short, and I would say it's actually put together a lot better than Jeff the Killer. Everything here is pretty competent in terms of prose. It's nothing too special, but it isn't full of basic grammatical errors, so that's definitely a point in its favor. This one is written in kind of that no-sleep format where it's supposed to be a first-hand account of something that actually happened. But let's dive into the reading of the actual story now. Hello, my name is Mitch. I'm here to tell you guys about an experience I had. So remember when I said I was going to be going through this with a fine-tooth comb? Get ready for a lot of nitpicking and constructive criticism. The second sentence here is awkward. It isn't completely out of place, but it feels oddly formal for what is presumably an internet forum. It sounds like he's starting like a seminar. You probably don't need to announce yourself and then preface what you were going to tell us if this is just an online discussion. I think we'd all understand if you just dove straight into it. I don't know if it was paranormal or whatever stupid words people use to describe supernatural phenomena, but after that thing visited me, I believe in that paranormal trash now. It's kind of funny they would act like they aren't sure what to call this experience and scoff at the term paranormal, but then immediately hit us with the supernatural phenomena phrasing. Like, it seems like this person is definitely aware of the terminology that people use when describing paranormal encounters, but they want to pretend like they don't. But I do think this is the inkling of a good idea. It can be very fun to have a character that is skeptical of the paranormal be forced to acknowledge its existence. I just recently read a book called This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno that was essentially about a haunted Alexa speaker, but it also did some other wild things in the story. But it used that trope of a person having to come to terms with the existence of the paranormal in the world. And I think it's a very fun, classic horror trope. But the combative nature of the way that it is set up here personally is pretty off-putting to me, especially since our protagonist won't be established as intentionally unlikable in the future. Also, this is all written, again, like this is something that's already happened to the author, and the author is acting way too casual for what's about to happen to them. It gets wild. A week after I moved in with my brother Edwin, after my house was foreclosed, I finished unpacking. The phrasing there is a little awkward with the after written twice in the same sentence. It would sound better if they were to put those in separate sentences. Something like, I moved in with my brother Edwin since my house was foreclosed on. After a week, I had finally finished unpacking. It's still a little awkward, but that's mostly because I don't think that specifying that Mitch finished unpacking a week after moving in is a necessary detail. It doesn't set up any story beats in particular and doesn't really tell us anything about his character either. Taking a week to unpack isn't that crazy, especially if you've moved from a house. Edwin liked the idea of me moving in since we had not seen each other for 10 years, so I was excited too. We never get an explanation as to why they haven't seen each other in 10 years, which strikes me as really strange. I thought for sure it would come back Jack later. I was thinking that they might have had some shared trauma to do with like Eyeless Jack, or maybe they didn't grow up in a great house, but we find out later that their parents are still together and seem to be pretty supportive. I see my siblings at least once a year and oftentimes like 4 or 5 times a year, and that's despite the fact that we live in different states. It just seems like a strange plot point to not address. 10 years is a long time to go without seeing your family. I soon fell asleep after I moved in. After that first week, I heard rustling noises coming from outside at about 1 in the morning. It's a really strange choice to specify that Mitch fell asleep soon after he moved in, but then have the rustling sound not show up until a week later. That initial phrasing of "I soon fell asleep after I moved in" primes the reader to think that what's coming next is going to happen in that same kind of period of time. You would expect him to like wake up and maybe hear the rustling that night, but having it take a week for him to notice feels like an unnecessary detail that doesn't really add anything to the story. I thought it was a raccoon, so I ignored it and tried to fall asleep. The next morning, I told Edwin about it and he agreed. The next night, however, I thought I heard my window opening and a loud thump, as if something entered my room. I darted up and looked around my room, but I saw nothing. The next morning, Edwin dropped his coffee cup when he saw me. He held up a nearby mirror and I saw myself. I had a large gash in my cheek. I love the detail of Edwin like pulling out a little mirror like a barber does after cutting your hair instead of him just like telling Mitch to go look in the mirror. Also, if you thought you heard your window open in the middle of the night and then woke up with a large gash on your cheek, move out of the house, sleep somewhere else. That is more than enough reason to believe that something bad is going on in that house, and keep in mind that I'm suggesting this course of action due to a gash on the cheek. Mitch is about to discover something far more alarming than just a gash on his cheek, and he still decides to sleep in the same bed. Keep this in mind going forward. After I was rushed to the hospital, my doctor told me that I must have been sleepwalking. But then he showed me something that made my blood turn cold. I love how this doctor tells Mitch that he was probably just sleepwalking. I could maybe understand that since he just has a gash on his cheek. It's not that crazy. You could maybe sleepwalk and then like run into something and I guess not wake up. It's a little far-fetched, but it's not the worst theory I've ever heard. Now, what would make this theory kind of hilarious would be if Mitch had some sort of other injury that the doctor knew about, something that should call for immediate alarm. He lifted up my shirt to reveal a sewn-up incision where my kidneys were. I stared into his eyes, mine widening. "You somehow lost your left kidney last night," my doctor told me. "We don't know how, though. Sorry, Mitch." I take everything back. The story is genius. It's hilarious. This has to have been a joke, right? I love how the doctor is presumably now convinced that Mitch probably sleepwalked into an operating room and then had one of his kidneys taken out without knowing it. It's fair to say that this is far more alarming than the gash on his face, so why would the doctor not address that first? You would think he would ask Mitch if he ever had his kidneys removed or something. Also, definitely a nitpick, but you have 2 kidneys, one on either side of your spine, so to say there was a sewn-up incision where my kidneys are is kind of inaccurate. And I'm not a doctor, but it also kind of sounds like the doctor in this story isn't a doctor either, so who knows. And "Sorry, Mitch" is just so funny. The most nonchalant response to a man having one of his kidneys stolen from him, just like, "Tough luck, buddy, it happens to the best of us." I almost wonder if this story was written around the same time that Lost was on TV, because that show has a prominent character that had his kidney stolen, or maybe it's just a coincidence. I think the idea of having a kidney stolen in this story lends itself to my thought that this story was probably written by a younger author, most likely a teenager. Having an organ stolen is of course horrifying, but it also feels like an idea that some kid would read about online and then immediately shoehorn into a story because it's like super messed up. Kind of like how in Jeff the Killer we have the thing of bleach and alcohol spilling on his face and then lighting on fire. It feels like just like a weird scary idea that a kid would latch onto. I know that I did this a lot when I was younger. I remember getting like weirdly obsessed with certain details of horror movies or like stories, like the way that a certain victim would die. I think that's what made the Saw franchise so alluring and mystical to me. I didn't watch those movies until college, but I remember like reading the Wikipedia summaries for all of them when I was in middle and high school. And maybe that's just because I was an odd kid, but I guess I'm also kind of an odd adult, so not much has changed. The next night was my breaking point. You'd think that getting your kidney stolen in the middle of the night would be your breaking point, but it seems like Mitch was able to brush that off pretty quickly. Around midnight, I woke up to see a truly horrifying sight. I was staring face to face with a creature with a black hoodie and dark blue mask with no nose or mouth staring down at me. I've always found it kind of interesting that Eyeless Jack wears a mask. You'd think it would be like a Jeff the Killer situation where his appearance is due to like his face being super messed up. But I have to admit that I actually think it's a cool detail. I think it's kind of a fun trope to have like a scary monster or killer wear a mask to seemingly hide some part of them. But then these same villains or monsters show other parts of them that we would think are repulsive or disconcerting. It sort of acts as like a window into how this weird paranormal entity might view himself, which I think is pretty cool. The thing that scared me the most was that it had no eyes, just empty black sockets. the creature also had some black substance dripping from its sockets. I know that I typically point out the flaws in these stories, but I do have to say that while I think there's a lot in this story that's flawed, I actually quite like this description. I think it's pretty well written. I maybe wouldn't have put sockets twice in a row and just specified that the empty black sockets had a black substance dripping from them, but that's really the only piece of advice I would give to this particular description. Like I said earlier, I've never personally been scared by the Eyeless Jack picture, but I think this is a sufficiently creepy description for a paranormal internet horror monster, and I could see kids being super scared of this if they read it without knowing much about horror. I grabbed the camera from the nearby mantle and took a picture. Immediately after taking the shot, the creature lunged at me and tried to claw open my chest to get to my lungs. It's kind of funny that Mitch immediately knows that this thing is going for his lungs. I mean, we know that it took one of his kidneys, but it could be going for any of his other organs. It's also very interesting that Eyeless Jack only took one of his kidneys and not both of them. He seems very measured in what he chooses to take from Mitch. He's not like a pig after all. I stopped it by kicking it in the face. As I ran out of my room, I grabbed my wallet. I would need the money. I ran out of my brother's house and into the night. I eventually ended up in the woods near Edwin's house and tripped on a rock. The detail of Mitch specifically grabbing his wallet because he thinks he'll need the money is really strange because it doesn't come back later at all. I don't think it's entirely unrealistic to grab something like your wallet in a moment of panic just out of reflex. I could see myself doing the same thing, but I don't know why the author mentions it specifically. There are a couple moments like this that make me think this was supposed to be part of a longer story, but then the author decided just to post what they had. I do wonder if there are more parts to this though, especially given the detail that Mitch and Edwin hadn't seen each other for 10 years and that Mitch's house had been foreclosed on. It just feels like there should be a backstory here that we haven't gotten. That's not to say that every horror story needs a backstory. They really don't. Sometimes a backstory can make things less scary overall. But if this wants to be a standalone story, then it shouldn't be introducing some little plot threads that are never followed up on. Again, if there are more parts of this story that explains this, then I'm fine retracting this criticism. I fell unconscious and woke up in the hospital. My doctor, the same one who treated me before, entered the room. This is kind of a really weird use of dashes where it should probably just be commas or a semicolon, or I guess maybe you could do a full colon. Also, how did Mitch get to the hospital? We are never told who brought him there, but we can probably assume it was like the police. I have good news and bad news, Mitch, my doctor started. The good news is that you had minor injuries and your parents are going to pick you up. I sighed with relief. The bad news is that your brother has been killed by something. Sorry. Come on, this has to be a comedy, right? There is no way that someone wrote this without knowing just how funny it sounded. I'm not even being facetious. I legitimately am starting to think this might have just been a joke story. The fact that the doctor knows that Mitch's brother is dead, and he starts with the good news of him having minor injuries is just so funny to me. If something that harrowing and life-changing has happened to someone, it's probably best to just deliver the bad news with reverence and tact, rather than treating your brother is dead and you have some cuts and scrapes with the same level of concern. Also, the doctor saying sorry again is also just hilarious. He doesn't even give him like an I'm so sorry, he just hits him with a single word like he can't be bothered to feel any concern for Mitch. My parents took me back to Edwin's house to collect my remaining belongings, which I did. Upon entering my room, I was scared but remained calm. Kind of wild that Mitch's parents just left him to get his belongings in the house alone. They have to know that Edwin died there and would presumably kind of like offer to go in the house with him for moral support. I grabbed my camera and then stopped dead in my tracks. In the hallway leading to my room, I saw Edwin's body and something small lying next to it. So the police and the doctor seem to know that Edwin died. They even know he was killed by some sort of freaky creature, but they didn't bother to remove his body from the house? Why is he still there? I figured that like Mitch was found unconscious in the woods and taken to the hospital by the police investigating Edwin's dead body, but I guess they just left him in there, or they never took him to the hospital in the first place. But all of this does play into a theory that I have about this story that probably isn't true, but I think it would make it marginally better and make it make more sense, but I'll talk about that at the end of the story. I retrieved it up and entered my parents' car, not mentioning Edwin's corpse. Listen, I don't want to tell you how to live your life, Mitch, but you should probably mention your dead brother's corpse to your parents. They would probably like to know that piece of information. I looked at the thing I had picked up and nearly vomited. I was holding my stolen half-eaten kidney with some black substance on it. End of story. So a couple questions for that last section. Why did Mitch pick up the kidney in the first place? Why does he assume it's his when it could be Edwin's? And why doesn't he mention any of this to his parents? I guess he could afterwards. It's just like such a weird, abrupt, bizarre ending, but all these old creepypastas often felt like they were trying to set up an entity for other authors to make their own stories about. I actually think that framework is really cool and it's done correctly. The SCP Wiki is probably the best example of this sort of like writing by committee. But let's go back and explain what happened in this story exactly. Mitch moves in with Edwin, has his kidney stolen in his sleep by Eyeless Jack, goes back to sleep at Edwin's house, finds the creature in his room, runs away and trips on a rock, wakes up and is told that his brother is dead, is picked up by his parents who take him back to the murder house. He discovers Edwin's body still in the house along with his own half-eaten kidney, and then he just calmly leaves the house and drives away. But you see, my headcanon and my new theory is that the doctor is Eyeless Jack, and that's why he's so ambivalent to everything that's happening to Mitch. It's the only thing that explains it. That would also account for how the doctor would know that Edwin is dead, even though Edwin's body is still in the house, having not been collected by the police yet. Because the doctor would have been the one to kill Edwin and then leave him in the house, and then he maybe took Mitch when he tripped on the rock and brought him back to the hospital, and maybe he's taking his organs as like this weird organ form, but he also eats the organs, and maybe he has like black mascara that he wears that drips on people. I actually don't think that like any of that was the original intent of the author, but it's the only thing that might make the doctor's weird actions make a little more sense. But all the headcanon in the world would be completely wasted because as is, this story is completely hilarious and I would not change a thing. I think sometimes people conflate quality with enjoyment. Those two things are often correlated, but they don't have to be. When I was in high school, two of my best friends and I sat down and watched the Nicolas Cage remake of The Wicker Man, and it was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But you know what? We loved every second of it. It was seriously one of the funniest and funnest experiences I've ever had watching a movie. I mean, Nicolas Cage literally puts on a full bear costume and then punches a woman in the face, and everything is just completely insane. What's not to love about that movie? And all of this is to say that we weren't wrong for enjoying that movie. You're not wrong for enjoying any piece of media, either ironically or unironically. And I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't enjoy something. That is one of my least favorite things that people do on the internet. Opinions are totally okay to have, and it's also fine to admit that you like something that maybe isn't that high quality. A lot of old creepypasta is written kind of poorly, but coming back to see those flaws doesn't negate or invalidate the way you felt about the story when you read it for the first time. I remember thinking Jeff the Killer was super scary when I first read it, and I don't see that as like an invalid reading of the story. I just see it as kind of a relic of who I used to be. And again, the purpose of this video is in no way meant to make fun of the author. Everyone has to start somewhere, and they wrote something that has honestly brought joy to countless readers. I'm sure that the author can probably look back at this old story and laugh, and maybe also be a little stoked that it's become so famous. I know I would be. So whether you enjoy this story ironically or unironically, understand that both of those takes are valid. The value doesn't come from the quality of the media, it comes from the way that it makes you feel. But I'm probably ranting too much at the end here. Like I said, I had a few people get mad at me in the Russian sleep experiment video because they thought I was being too negative. But I loved all these stories when I read them for the first time, and I don't blame anyone who enjoys them or even thinks they're great pieces of internet horror now. That's just your opinion. And at the end of the day, the worst thing a story could be is boring, and Eyeless Jack is certainly anything but boring. Thank you guys so much for watching me talk about creepypasta for like 15 minutes or however long this video ends up being. It really does mean a lot to me. If you like what I do here and want to see more, then please subscribe. I make videos about internet horror, the SCP wiki, and horror literature. If you're a viewer that found me through my SCP videos, know that I will have more of those up soon. I'm changing my video rotation schedule, so I'll put those up more often. It's just hard because I think I have kind of three core audiences with the creepypasta and internet horror, and then the SCP, and then the horror literature, and I want to make sure I'm giving an equal opportunity and equal exposure to all three of those styles of content because I like making all three of those. If you have another creepypasta you'd like me to look at, maybe something longer, then please let me know. I'm open to any suggestions. If you haven't seen my Jeff the Killer or Russian sleep experiment videos, then please go watch those. Watching those longer videos really helps my channel out. If you want to support me further, then please consider becoming a channel member, where for just $3 a month you'll get access to my Discord, members only videos, early access to all my videos, and access to my members only book club. This video in particular is going up 5 or 6 days early for channel members. It just depends on when I finish it. It'll be posted immediately for channel members, and then it goes out to everybody either on Wednesday or Saturday, depending on what video it is. But you'll also get your name in the credits of all my videos like you're seeing right now on the screen. A massive thank you to all my gold tier members: Amanda Mapes, Lucas Fernando, Chris Lamb, Ezra, Silent Trails, Blue Radio Media, Tyler the Leper, Vix Corner, Mishjoy16, Coco Boko, Cherry Shark, Sadish John, Moonson Blog, Starlight Pink, Jack Sabor, Amanda Castillon, Lexi, Arcade Link Author, Pyrocat B, The Official Gar, Passion the Fruit, Wybap Flow, High, Zapodapos, Samurai Laura Gonzalez, Flora Paz, Rafael Sampao, Classic Pats Games Plus, Miranda M, Lemonade Slug, Heat O'Brien, Ben Best, and Marin Elizabeth. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. I'm super grateful for you guys every single day, and I'm still kind of shocked that you guys like my stuff enough to kind of support me further in this way. I hope you guys feel like it's worth it. But now it's time for my hidden Davis Morgan lore segment at the end of the video. I'm going to briefly talk about my birds because people have asked me about them before. My wife and I have 3 birds. 2 are Australian budgies, or parakeets as most people know them, and 1 is a cockatiel. We got the budgies first, and the cockatiel is a relatively new addition to our household. We've had her for almost a month. Our first budgie Fudgy is named Charlie, and he's kind of obsessed with me. He always wants to hang out and like snuggles up with me all the time whenever he feels like I'm not giving him enough attention. He can also talk, and he says things like Charlie and sweet birdies and can do kissing noises. It's pretty adorable. He's just like a really good bird overall. Chip is our other parakeet. He's also super sweet, but he's really just mostly obsessed with Charlie, which is kind of unfortunate because Charlie's obsessed with me. And Chip is like less affectionate, but lately he's been giving me a lot more kisses. He's been more affectionate to me. He's typically a lot more active than Charlie is, and he's always like flying around the apartment and bobbing up and down and screeching and chasing Charlie around. He's also a good little bird. And Cookie is our newest bird. She's a cockatiel who's been through a couple homes and been surrendered multiple times for being kind of difficult or like scary. She's actually super sweet though. She sits in here with me during the day, and she started stepping up on my finger for treats, and she's pretty comfortable with both me and my wife now. She still doesn't love hands, and she'll hiss and give like a little raptor screech if I try to put my hand too close to her. I think she may have been like maybe abused in her previous homes, but we're getting there with her. She likes the parakeets a lot, but they're like a little apprehensive of her. If you're someone who wants to own birds, I'll tell you now that they aren't the easiest pets to deal with. We have like a massive cage for them, and we let them free fly during the day. They are super loud. Even the parakeets, the small ones, they like scream and screech and call for each other, and they'll call for you when you leave the room. They can also take a long time to warm up to human interaction. I think we had Charlie for over a month before he was even stepping up onto our fingers. They're like prey animals. They're used to being hunted, so it's unnatural for them to like humans. They're also super social, need like 8 to 10 hours of social interaction a day, and this means that unless you like work from home and are home all day, then you'll need to get 2 birds. They're also pretty messy. Like cleaning their cage is kind of a gross job, and they will poop on you at some point. You can't have like scented candles or air fresheners because it hurts their tiny little bird lungs. You also can't cook on non-stick pans for the same reason. There's just a lot of things you can't do to owning birds, and they also live a super long time. Our cockatiel could probably live to be like 20 or 30 years old someday. But if you're willing to put in the work and you have a good environment for them that's safe and you can find some at a shelter, then they can be great pets. They can be super affectionate and super awesome. But anyways, this is all going on way too long. Again, thank you guys so much for watching my videos, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.